Yep. Hello, everyone. My name is Bernadette Smith, and I'm a keynote speaker and writer. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I found is there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data, but there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these actions and policies to help you build a more inclusive world. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Carlos Butler-Vale, who's him, co-host of corporate Cafecito Business Podcast and founder of Avizo Consulting. I might need to re-record that later. This week, our conversation is about history at the Oscars, marriage equality in Thailand, Bloomberg's big investment, and more. Welcome to the show, Carlos. Great to have you.
Thank, thank you so much. I love your energy, and I just want to bring that with me everywhere, all the time.
It's a good way to start the week. It forces me to have that energy even when I don't necessarily
Uh,
have it. It's sort of like, all right, here it
yeah,
is.
I was gonna say, and you're doing this on a Monday, so yes, absolutely.
Well, it is great to have you on the show, Carlos. Can you tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, it's great to be on. Again, Carlos Butler-Vale, he, him. I live in the greater Chicagoland area. I have been a DEI executive for a long time and recently decided to dedicate myself full time to other endeavors, such as the Corporate Cafecito podcast, and obviously have done some consulting on and off over the years and just given the shifting landscape, which I could not have predicted sort of the full extent of this. I would say even a year ago, but there are a lot of folks out there who still want to do good, and and there are still a lot of good vibes generally, even though as you and I have chatted, you definitely have to go out and search for them.
Yeah.
But so doing that gives me an opportunity to continue, obviously, to make sure that other folks feel that they can successfully continue the work.
Awesome. And can you tell folks a little bit about the sort of your angle in the consulting space and what your specific focus is?
Absolutely. So I love kind of bringing an intersection of what I would call kind of corporate and human resource communications, culture work, not just within HR, but obviously everything on down from boards of directors who really help set the tone for and give a lot of that leeway to CEOs and the C-suite to make what I would say, what I unfortunately now have to say feel like tough decisions, but at
Right.
some point felt like the right decisions to make.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, obviously bringing in that inclusion and belonging lens. So it's a nice combination of human resources. It's a nice combination of DEI, corporate communications, and more than anything, I think it's important to also keep the business element in mind. So for me, the focus is always about leveraging DE&I as a growth driver. And so how do we then take all of that and make sure that we're telling a good story to our shareholders as well? Because I think,
Mm-hmm.
as we've seen, if the shareholders aren't necessarily aligned, or if they're not getting necessarily the right message, then it can be increasingly more difficult. And so that is a big part of the focus of my consulting work.
There's got to be a good story around it that drives value. That makes a lot of sense. I think
Absolutely.
that's so valuable, especially as you said, when we are seeing um, corporations under attack by shareholders. So yeah, absolutely, that's
Yeah,
important, and I think that's a lot of what
and
Costco was saying when they stood their ground.
I think that's exactly right. And what I loved about what Costco did is that they took, which is very much aligned to the way that I like to pursue this work, and I like
Hmm.
to help organizations pursue this work, which is you can do well and do good. That's
Right.
like my tagline. So, I always say you can do well and do good. And so what I love about what they did is even though they responded externally, a big part of the focus was really around the internal message. And so
Hmm.
if anything, I would say Costco provided a masterclass for for not only being clear externally and leveraging that corporate communications element of the work, but
Mm-hmm.
also leveraging that human resources communication and that internal element of it to say, and we see you and we stand behind you. And that's exactly, I would say, the perfect of all worlds.
Yeah, and they are noted in their industry for having very low turnover. So obviously they're and good pay, which contributes. So it all makes a lot of sense. The business case is super clear.
Yeah, love it.
Well, in this week's newsletter, Carlos, I have to acknowledge the crashing down of federal DEI. We lost the Food and Drug Administration as a client. So it was definitely heart wrenching, and there's still so much uncertainty. So acknowledge all that, but of course, this is the Good Vibes show. So, I was able to fortunately find some distractions last week. I had a comedy class performance and a keynote, an in-person keynote. And you know what? The audience is they need this stuff. They are ready for this stuff. I mean, at least my experience was they were all in. And this was a bunch of people in sales, in an insurance industry and financial services, and they were all in. And I think it's because they need the message of DEI is about or at least my message was about relationships and building authentic relationships, and how we've gotten to this place where we are unfortunately really siloed and not making those genuine connections. And that's not very good for sales. And of course, that affects the business case, right? So for me, it's all really clear. In that perspective, and that's kind of where I'm taking my business is focusing on the business. Not the HR side of things, but this side of things, the side of things where it's customer and client, and um, you know that's the stuff that I think is still very sellable.
Yeah, Bernadette, there's something, when you were sharing that information with me, there was something that stood out to me, which is, and I hope this changes, there's a fear that people feel. Um, what's tough is I believe, and when I was leading this work, some of the biggest proponents of the work were allies. And they were the ones who were, when you sometimes didn't feel that you could speak up as an identifier, let's say for me as an LGBTQ plus person or any other sense of identity, it was the allies often in the room who actually did not fear speaking up, who leverage their privilege to
Mm-hmm.
say, I don't believe this is okay. But you brought up an interesting point about the sales element of it, because at the end of the day, you don't want to say anything that necessarily makes your client uncomfortable. But what I've noticed is that there's a heavy imbalance in that, because even in my own world, wherever I'm at, I'm hearing more people be vocal about their dislikes, or and it's kind of scary. It's
Yeah.
scary to see how people have suddenly felt so emboldened to say things that would not have been, forget politically correct, this is not even politically correct, this is the difference between being rude and just mean and all these other things, and people just feel so emboldened. So I have had folks that I know that are in sales that have said, you would not believe something that a client recently said, and I wish I could have said something, but I can't.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing is it's happening more and more often. And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know what the answer is to that, but I do think that that's where your at least internal community is really important, because if they don't necessarily have that with their clients, hopefully they can at least still want to continue to have the types of, to make space for the types of conversations that you're having.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really tough when there's a power imbalance, right? It's really, really tough. Those aggressions, let's just call them, not even microaggressions, aggressions.
Yeah.
When there's a power imbalance, it's really, really hard to be an ally. So, yeah, it is tough out there. All right, well, let's move into this week's Good Vibes. The first story this week comes from Bloomberg Philanthropies. The new Trump administration withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement for the second time, and Bloomberg Philanthropies stepped up to fill the funding void. So, along with other funders, it's ensuring U.S. meets its global climate commitments, including emissions reporting and support for vulnerable nations. So, the only reason I included this story, Carlos, is because sometimes right now we need to see private efforts sort of filling in the gaps.
I think it's a great example, especially when you're seeing some very public companies that are either scaling back even slightly or being less vocal. The acknowledgement that there is a void and that they're willing to do something about it is encouraging. So I'm so glad you added that to the newsletter.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second story this week comes from the travel industry, where companies like Hyatt Hotels and Carnival Cruise Line, they are being much more intentional to accommodate neurodivergent travelers. So Hyatt has pre-arrival room selection, digital keys, weighted blankets, sensory-friendly certifications at a number of their properties. Carnival has sensory bags with noise-canceling headphones and fidget toys, and lots of crew training to assist their neurodivergent guests. Diversity means
I,
everyone.
I love it. I have a niece who is neurodivergent. She has autism, and um, there's some nonverbal things, it manifests in different ways, but one of the things for her in particular is noise sensitivity. And I I just love to see these types of things because I think obviously it's becoming more prevalent. The one thing I think is interesting is unfortunately there still feels to be a little bit of a stigma to ask for these types of services. And so my hope is that as more people learn that there are companies that are going out there and doing these things, that folks are actually taking advantage of them. So uh, this is fantastic, and that makes me want to potentially look at a Carnival cruise trip.
Potentially, yes. Have you heard of the sunflower lanyards, Carlos?
Why does that sound familiar? Tell me more.
So the sunflower lanyards are sort of for people with invisible disabilities to wear as they
Ah,
travel,
yeah,
right? And so it sort of sends a signal to folks who are trained that they might need some special assistance or that they have, kind of extra consideration. So yeah, it's something that's catching on more in the travel industry than elsewhere.
good. I love it. I think anything that can make folks feel that they can be a part of the processes and that their money is worth as much as everyone else's. That again, talking about leveraging these types of initiatives to be business and growth drivers, that's exactly where I think the good and the well can meet in the middle.
Exactly, exactly. All right, the third story this week comes from the Oscar nominations, where Carla Sofia Gascon made history as the first openly transgender performer nominated for Best Actress in her role, Emilia Perez. Did you see that film, Carlos?
I did not, and that's on my list to watch this weekend, but I have heard so many mixed things about it.
Yeah,
I saw you saw it, right?
yeah, I mean it's a wild film. First of all, it's a musical. So that part, and it's the music part, the musical part is like very random as musicals often are. Um but yeah, it definitely is a wild ride, has a big plot twist. And it's I really enjoyed it though. But some people in our community, some trans folks didn't think that it was a great portrayal.
You know, I will obviously reach out to you when I finally get a chance to see it because I'd love to be able to compare notes a little bit. But what I found really interesting is the fact that the publicity around it has been more around how strange the film was, or it felt how strange the film felt to
Mm-hmm.
people, versus pointing out the fact that this was a trans that this was someone who was trans who was in a lead role. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think again as a DEI leader and practitioner, I think about that because typically I feel like I would have it would have felt flipped for me. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I would have heard more about, you know, you name it. I mean, I know that you've heard all kinds of, you heard of all kinds of things, but indoctrination, whatever it is, da da da. But I haven't really necessarily heard much of that outside of, ironically, just the LGBTQ plus world. For all the other folks, I feel like most of them have said this was not the film that I would have thought would have gotten all the all
Hmm.
these nominations, but here we go.
Yeah. You know what? I just found it very entertaining. And at the end of the day, I can be kind of shallow and just like pure popcorn.
It's funny.
All
I
right.
love it.
Gotta have some fun, right? The fourth story this week comes from Thailand, which made history as the first Southeast Asian country to legalize same sex marriage, with over 1,800 couples registering for marriage licenses on that first day. There were some mass weddings. This is expected to boost Thailand's tourism industry and set an example for neighboring countries. So, love this story, bright light.
I think I lived in Japan for years, an exchange student way back when, and um, just the difference between like East Asia, Southeast Asia. I mean, as you know, just culturally there are, I think, have been a lot of challenges. And so I do believe truly that this is actually going to be one of those situations where it's going to help with tourism, provide that boost. And I would not be surprised if maybe along the lines it really has that intended effect of helping others along in the process as well.
I hope so because money talks, right?
Yeah.
And that those tourism dollars can really make a big difference.
Thailand's on my list now.
There you go. Exactly. Exactly. All right. And the last story this week is a great story of allyship about U.S. Representative Emily Randall, who's the first out queer woman from Washington state in Congress. She has made her office restroom in the Capitol building open to all genders in defiance of Speaker Mike Johnson's restrictive bathroom policy. Now, the current policy, which was an anti trans policy set in place because we have our first trans Congresswoman, Sarah McBride. So, the current policy requires restroom use based on sex assigned at birth. And Representative Emily Randall said, everyone is welcome here.
This reminds me of a story also where Senator John Fetterman
Mm.
did the same, and I thought that was amazing. And so now to see that that it's going beyond the Senate and also happening in the House, and I know, Mike Johnson was the one who sort of started this all, but to see that there are folks again being out there leading, particularly John Fetterman as an ally in this case, to me, I think is definitely a good vibe. And so happy to see that there are folks out there that are recognizing that this doesn't detract from the work. This actually, like, this doesn't change, their ability to continue to do exactly what it was that they were elected for.
I mean, in fact, it enhances their ability, right?
Absolutely. Love it.
Oh, okay. Well, let's move into this week's good vibes to go. I'll read the first good, or I'll share my first good vibe to go, and then I'll invite you to share yours, Carlos. So, my
Yeah.
good vibe to go is to read an article in the Harvard Business Review by Lily Zhang. And the article is What Comes After DEI, and they introduce a new framework called FAIR, FAIR. So, check out that article. How about you, Carlos? What you got?
My good vibe to go is the fact that this past weekend I had the opportunity to go with my 3-year-old to see the Peoria Symphony Orchestra do a live rendition of the movie Encanto.
Mm.
And we had seen it before, but it was amazing to be able to experience that in a place like Central Illinois. And immediately after that, we actually went and opened up or helped to open up Peoria's first ever LGBTQ plus center called Central Illinois Friends. And so it was just
Wow.
a great weekend of having an opportunity to do some really great cultural things, in addition to obviously helping to support the community. And I couldn't be happier about the fact that this is in Central Illinois, a place that's becoming such a big hub for folks who are living in surrounding states that are unfortunately either very quickly or very slowly peeling back rights for LGBTQ plus folks.
And I'm sure those services that you said it's the Friends Center. I'm
Central Illinois Friends, yeah,
Central Illinois Friends. I'm sure those services will be in high demand right now.
absolutely.
And people are moving into Illinois from other states. So,
Exactly.
absolutely. That's great. I'll make sure we get that in the show notes. Carlos, how can folks get in touch with you?
I'm on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Carlos Bale. And you can also check out the Corporate Cafecito website or for information about our podcast. We're also on Apple, just as Bernadette. And I would say those are definitely, I feel like I check LinkedIn more than I do any of the other social sites that I'm even on. So please, please, please feel free to reach out there. And I can't wait to obviously just continue to do my part to ensure that there are more good vibes in DE&I.
Awesome. And when they are, you can make sure you can hear about them on this show. Okay, folks, if you don't already get the Five Things newsletter, you can subscribe at fivethingsdei.com. Thank you so much, Carlos. Everyone, have a great week.
Thank you, Brendan.